To serve the society as a purpose is what we believe most superhero characters are for. Therefore, we often associate them with the idea of idealism. This perception comes from the major image of superhero characters in mass media, wide and global on the internet, where they bear strong inhuman powers, such as strength so unmeasured, laser beams from their eyes, or flying abilities, etc. Most of them already came in handy with the ideal positive trait. But what does positive traits actually mean and how does it look like? Positive traits meaning the portrayal of what they do and what they believe is the purpose of their actions, as well as the goals and the characteristics they are portrayed with, is deemed morally good in the wide society. Positive traits may range from holding a sense of responsibility, courage, kindness, honesty, loyalty, and even more. What we can see here is that most of these characters hold a strong reflection of moral values. They're deemed as ethical compasses for the audience. But let's crystallize a few things before we went too far off from the motion. Firstly, we're talking about the designated traits of superheroes and how they're exclusively seen as ideals bearing positive traits and having no flaws at all, marketed in the widely normal human society with no supernatural powers. While our side does not completely dismiss the overall impact of the ideal and perfect superheroes, we can see that it does set the bar of standards up pretty high. It is possible to call it unrealistic. What form does it come from in the status quo? Example A. Violence and aggression justification just for the greater good. They often lack alternatives just to achieve championship or winning. This power abuse often comes when they possess the ultimate strength where it results to them using it violently and aggressively. Example B. Vigilantism. Most superheroes came from fantasy backgrounds and most of them are not associated in the legal authorities, as well as the vigilantism or law enforcement, often shown as serving justice to the villains, isn't something that should become an ideal. Our stance is clear. We want superheroes to become exclusively designated and able to contend to negative traits and the capability of wrongdoings, therefore making a little shift on their essence of morals, including more complex characteristics, whilst reducing unrealistic standard, so the audience who consume the media would be able to relate and set society expectations to be more achievable within a balanced morality. First issue from our side about negative traits and fallibility. Why it is okay and necessary for superhero characters to be exclusively shown with negative traits and the ability to make a failure or wrongdoings. Let's clear up a little ambiguity. What does negative traits actually refer in the context of this debate? Negative traits are tendencies or characteristics that are deemed undesirable or labeled as harmful within the social context by the people themselves. How they decide that it is bad would be measured by a parameter, and the parameter is morality itself, meaning any actions that are against or the opposite of what majority believe moral values are would be concluded and believed as a negative trait, often developing the labels of bad on certain individuals or even groups. Although it is undesirable and harmful, it doesn't mean that it doesn't come naturally within the behavior of a natural human being. Whilst it is not encouraged, it's not uncommon and often shown in the media. An easy to understand example in the media would be the 7 deadly sins, like pride, for example. And then there's a lot of category that comes in each sin. For pride, sometimes it would be overconfidence, selfishness, lack of awareness, and many more to come. For greed, of course, it would be something like never having enough, always wanting more, the desire for fame, lack of empathy, manipulation, etc. Surely, most of these portrayals often serve in a bad perspective, in which the audience shouldn't follow or do what the bad guys do, although it sometimes does come as relatability, where they could feel a little representation for the struggles they're going through daily. It's also common that these characters always learn their lesson by the bad things they do, like how they realize that it's not worth it to spend their time being miserable and finally overcome it within a solution, and that becomes their character development. Surely, this also becomes a source of motivation and hope for the audience consuming them, meaning raising a spirit of changing and the miserable traits people are going through, or even overcoming a bad gloomy past they once had. It is also better to present realistic expectations so people wouldn't feed through unrealistic standards like never making a mistake, because perfectionism isn't something to thrive through. Even though superheroes were magically birthed with supernatural powers, they are still capable of failure or mistakes. This is a much better example than making them a perfect ideal, but blessed with powers where it is very unrealistic. For example, a superhero with an amazing strength are still finding it hard to manage the pressure of the strength. Sometimes they would accidentally break the floors they walk on or breaking the doorknobs they hold. The logic makes sense. The power isn't always a good thing, but it is not shown as coherently a negative or bad thing. Therefore, making it more realistic, even though it's still fantasy, as in a normal human wouldn't have that much strength, but people will look at them with more relatability. Maybe with a slight comedic relief even, and his moral values make sense a lot more because people are often more biased and drawn to flaws, leaving them a lot more approachable. So while at the same time we're implementing a healthier standards and expectations throughout the society, we're providing a more representation of the struggles people are going through. Going against the moral values in social context doesn't always have a bad impact when it's executed in the right way, where it is portrayed to represent struggles and the solution of how to overcome it. A strong role model of motivation that is at the same time relatable would also make people more drawn into the depth and complexity of the character itself, making the media marketed more widely towards more group of people, and within that much impact, it would be easier for the society to be influenced with a more balanced moral understanding. Therefore, it is important to normalize the portrayal of negative traits and fallibility exclusively. Second issue from our side, toxic positivity in the white media. Why we do not need more unrealistic positive and so-called productive standards and expectations in the media. As we all know, there's been a wave of trends where people are glamorizing idealism such as toxic positivity and more glamorization of being productive. If we link back this to the motion, the idea of ideal positive characters also falls into this category of the trends. How exactly? As these superheroes seem to have great powers and great qualities, they're often praised. This is not limited to people who follow the qualities too, but there is a slight clash between the two of these. The superheroes are fictional. Even if we put a lot of complaints and protests to them, after all, nothing is impossible since they're not real, they're fantasies. Meanwhile, humans, on the other hand, have a lot of flaws and incapabilities. It is never a high percentage for someone to successfully follow the traits and qualities the characters have. We will produce a lot more failures and flaws even within the following the unrealistic standards, usually making us end up feeling even more miserable than before because we've come to realize that we will never be that expectation of the so-called ideal. It will only go worse from here, where people start to give in to despair as they believe they will never be able to achieve the standards and expectations when there's only exclusively these positive traits shown in the media they consume. Now let's talk about the media and the status quo. There's been trends of archetypes of toxic productivity, and by that I mean a lot. Ever since the end of a pandemic we all went through, people start to become interested in documenting their lifestyles. Whilst it is not coherently a bad thing, but not everyone has the same perspective, especially the same mental stability. If we go back to talk about the 7 deadly sins, one of them is envy, and envy mostly results in distinction. Distinction can be found when we have comparative variables, meaning a lot of people do compare what they're going through and what the others are also going through. When these results are envy, it's bad. When continued, it's going to be toxic. The more people compare, the more toxic archetype goes, especially when we found out that not all of these people on the internet actually live this way. They also envy the others who are doing the same. It has become a repetitive bad impact, hence why we don't want to encourage this trend by not contributing to it furthermore. Let's talk about the impact of the ideal superheroes. As proposed in the context earlier, the ideal superheroes will always do the things for the greater good. Sure, it is to their moral values, but at the same time, they're justifying doing anything to their powers only for the sake of winning. Most superheroes always resort to violence, beating up the bad guys just so they could win, sometimes even finishing the lives of others to save more. In this case, it sounds like utilitarianism, where all sacrifice good for the greatest good for the greatest number. While it is a question for morality, it isn't a good way to be portrayed as a role model or even the justification of violence and aggression. The impact of this influence would escalate even worse when applied to the real world, and we don't want that. This is why we believe positive ideals is something that sets the bar of expectations too unrealistic, whereas it would just leave something as worse as we dismiss the human flaws that are actually fun to embrace the way they are, as we all learn on how to overcome something that is better and more realistic. It also felt better to just be real, not to act fake like the standard, hence why we believe exclusively making superheroes more relatable is better when we already see much examples of failed false positivity on the other side, and why our side wants to make change for the greater good. Proud to propose.